The order of operations will be the following. I'm going to briefly introduce Brian and David. Then I'm going to ask a few questions. I have more available, but I will withhold those, and I promise you'll have time to ask all of yours. If we still have time before they must leave, which will be no later than 12:15, then I guess I can jump back in with a couple of questions, but I don't think that'll be necessary. A brief introduction. Their journey, Brian Koppelman and David Levien's journey in Hollywood began when they both wrote the original screenplay for Rounders. Over the next few years, Brian and David produced Knockaround Guys, The Illusionist, Runner Runner, and I Smile Back. In 2009, they wrote and directed Solitary Man, starring Michael Douglas. Other career highlights include joint work on many films, including Ocean's 13, Runaway Jury, The Girlfriend Experience, and the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary, This Is What They Want, for which they won an Emmy Award as directors. They co-created and executive produced Billions. Separately, Brian's Slate podcast, The Moment, is routinely on the best of lists, and David is a popular novelist and has published 4 books in the Frank Bear thriller series and 2 standalone novels. You two create television and films together as a true writing team with obviously admirable results. If you could, describe your working methods and how, if at all, your focus of contribution to the finished work may differ.
Well, first, thanks for having us here. It's a real treat to be here and talk to you all. We can never answer the question how sort of a difference in focus that we have. I think one of the secrets to, or keys to why we work well together for as long as we have is that we share the mission each time, which is to just focus on trying to identify exactly why we're telling the story we're telling, and then together to figure out how to tell the story. And we're constantly aware that we're serving this third thing, not what either of us want, but we're serving this particular story and the world of the story.
And just by way of background, we've been best friends since we were kids, like 35 years. So growing up, we've read the same books, gone to the same movies, listened to the same music. We're constantly exchanging what we're into as far as media. So we just have a very shared sensibility in that way and a very large common pool of references, which I think helps. In a way, you know, we're brothers, but without the family baggage. So it works pretty well.
So it goes beyond writing team shorthand.
Exactly, yeah, for sure.
The Wall Street Journal reported that Paul Giamatti's Chuck Rhodes was loosely based on prosecutor Preet Bharara, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and specifically his targeting of an American hedge fund manager, Scott Cohen. Additionally, elements of Billions mirror the high-profile insider trading trial of Matthew Martoma, a former employee of Mr. Cohen's firm who was convicted in 2014. Mr. Cohen has denied any wrongdoing and wasn't charged criminally. What can you tell us about the foregoing?
So the Wall Street Journal didn't report that, they guessed at it.
Yeah,
that's an important.
But they reported.
That's an important. Well, no, they didn't.
They said it.
Nah, they didn't exactly. And Erica Orton from the Journal talked to us, and it's quite clear in the piece that she wrote that it's not at all inspired by Preet Bharara. He was wonderful to us and allowed us to spend time with him. But we are certainly interested.
The commonality is that Preet has the job that our character Chuck Rhodes has, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy and reductive to think that it's Preet Bharara versus, I think you said, versus Mr. Cohen, but it's not. What we were interested in is the kind of people who sit in those positions, how they got there, the drivers of ambition and the need for power and control, the lies that we tell ourselves. You know, we start from a place of curiosity and fascination, and we were fascinated by the unfettered powers that a United States attorney has. Fascinated by the idea of the amount of discretion that they have in what to go after and when to go after it. And we were fascinated by hedge fund managers who, when they attain a certain level of success, become like nation states. You know, they have fleets of ships at their command. They have airplanes, many airplanes. They have people around them in executive protection capacities who are like small armies. And so they're able to have a footprint that is similar to a nation state.
And it's even been reported recently that some of the top hedge fund guys grossed as much this year as the GDP of some smaller nations.
As appeared in the show we just saw.
And so for us, that rather than sort of say, well, we want to tell a story that's ripped from the headlines, We wanted to talk about themes that have been interesting for a very long time about warring kingdoms. And we felt the closest analog to that now was a hedge fund titan and a United States attorney. And then in doing our research, we spoke to many people who lived those lives and did really a ton of research and investigative work. But the specifics of the lives those two gentlemen live are not in our show.
Right. In the opening scene of the series, we see a man who we will learn is Chuck Rhodes, played by Paul Giamatti, tied up and being administered to by a dominatrix. As Rhodes closes his eyes...
Administered to.
Yeah.
I think that's how he said it. He's like, honey, please administer to me. I need
By the way, I thought of a lot of... I read a lot of phrases, how that scene was described, so I tried to pick the most neutral one possible.
That's great.
Okay. As Rhodes closes his eyes in ecstasy, you cut to a skyline of New York. The skyline. Tell us how you decided to begin the show that way, with a sort of boundary-pushing tone, which in the end isn't directly about either prosecution or hedge fund managers, and more about what the sexual sort of sadomasochism element tells us about Rhodes or his wife.
That scene came out of an idea that we'd had in our heads for a long time, going back to that movie, The Girlfriend Experience, that you mentioned. That's a movie about high-end escort woman, and we did research in that field, and it seemed that like the one common thread that many of these women shared with us was that the more powerful the man that came to them, the more invariably they would ask at the end to be dominated. And we started to recognize that perhaps it was this carrying of all this power and responsibility in their daily lives that made them want to shed that behind closed doors in the bedroom. And we thought that a guy who was in this super powerful position as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District might be somebody that that would avail himself to that. And that was certainly one that Preet, with his great sense of humor, pointed out was not pulled from the truth.
Not drawn from his headline.
And as far as that being the opening, at some point it just announced itself as something that would be attention-getting in a way that would lock people in to see some of the more complicated stuff that came next.
Well, yeah, and we also wanted to try and play with the expectations that people have when they're watching something like this. So you see a powerful man, you see the way in which his dad talks to him, you see his position and the way in which he deals with the people who work for him. And we wanted you to, in taking in the various headlines about various people in prosecutorial positions, think that he was being unfaithful. And we wanted we wanted in the series, people have assumptions about these kinds of characters, and then often these assumptions are betrayed by what actually happens, and that's conscious on our part. And so we wanted right from the beginning to sort of announce that was going to happen on the show. Right? If we would have stopped the first episode, and I assume most of you have seen it or read about it, so you could understand what's going on in this app. If we would have stopped the show at the 55-minute mark, you would think he was an unfaithful man on top of it. And so we wanted you to carry, and that's the way people watch it. They believe that they're watching a bad man for a variety of reasons. And then we want you to have to question, well, wait, does that, what does it say about people who are in a marriage and make these accommodations? But the fact is, they're faithfully married to one another. They start the show and they have a relationship that is a deep and real one. And so that trick was part of what we felt would keep people wanting to watch the show.
It's interesting, the first episode, you may remember, of Mad Men sort of enter the same territory.
The reverse.
Yeah. Because you see Don sort of being a man about
Don't
town.
spoil Mad Men
yeah.
if they haven't seen it.
Well,
yes.
I think that's fair. In the last scene, he goes home.
He's a single man.
Right, I think he's a single man. In the last scene, he goes home to his family.
Exactly right.
You withheld the sort of tete-a-tete between Paul Giamatti and Damian Lewis by generally keeping out of the same room until the episode we just saw, the climax of The Deal. The New York Magazine called it the episode that Billions has been building toward all season and one of the most purely entertaining hours of television so far this year. Had you designed the program to sort of, The Deal to focus as the centerpiece?
Well, it's the midpoint of the season, so that's...
I mean, literally.
That's a very important episode in a season of TV, so we did know that there needed to be a lot of what seemed like it was going to be resolution, and then the thing exploding again. You know, with this construct, not trying to hew completely towards reality, but to try to give it a feeling of some verisimilitude, these people do not run into each other and spend a ton of time together. That's just not the way it works, obviously. We knew that dramatically, the more typical thing is that the main characters, or the main character and the antagonist, are constantly butting heads and in conflict. That's what makes it interesting. We had to sort of keep the conflict alive between them when the other one's not even on screen. And we had a couple of key moments along the way where we thought we could justify them being together, and justify them being together in an important way. You know, professionals in this room probably understand that U.S. attorneys often don't sit in on an individual case when a deal's being made, and the subject of the investigation also isn't really in the room. The lawyers can do that, but dramatically we had to take the license and smash these guys together at a few key moments.
I think it works.
Well, yeah. Well, we did, but at the beginning of the season, each season, we're doing on the second season, we do plot ahead of time where it makes sense rhythmically for them to run into one another, and then try to build the show so we can have those moments.
Can you comment on the show's central personal, professional, and legal conflict? The prosecutor's wife and dominatrix is also the in-house psychiatrist at the Axelrod Hedge Fund. She is privy to secrets from both sides, and we saw that obviously portrayed in episode 6, but it builds throughout the season.
Sure. First of all, the fact that we get to have these actors like Damian Lewis and Paul Giamatti and Maggie Siff and Malin Ackerman in these roles allowed us to write them as intelligently as we could, so that the characters were as intelligent as possible. And all these actors have this tremendous facility with empathy, and with when you watch them, you think that they're synthesizing lots of information and processing it. It's a hard trick for an actor to pull off. And I talk about that stuff because we knew from the beginning that the role of Wendy was going to be the key to the show. We knew it was the one thing, you know, in every show you have to buy into something, and we knew that was the buy-in that you'd have to make. So we needed an actress who would allow us to do that. And when Maggie read, it was instantly clear to the two of us that she was a person around whom we could build this whole thing, because it is tricky. We found a lot of precedent, you know, when the show opens.
The conceit is that she was working for Axe before she was with Chuck, so that was baked into her life.
And you know, there was the idea is there was no way that one could have predicted at the beginning that Chuck Rhodes or the United States Attorney would go after him. And you know, Chris Christie's wife worked for a bank when Chris Christie was in that job and didn't stop. And there are many examples of that kind of conflict that we could find. And we love the idea of this performance coach. Tony Robbins famously coaches one of the most successful hedge funders in history, Paul Tudor Jones. They communicate every morning. They talk on the phone. They Skype. Tony comes and sees him. And many different hedge funds have somebody like Wendy Rhodes there. And so when the idea announced itself to us that we could have a character in both worlds, this position seemed the perfect spot for the very reason you said, the access to secret information.
Yeah, and then as the pressure grows between the two guys, they each sort of start slightly bending and crossing boundaries. You know, clearly there still wouldn't be a problem if Chuck recused himself or sent the case over to another district, but that was something he becomes unwilling to do. And then she should, you know, act as a Chinese wall with both sets of information, but when the pressure grows in this episode, she engages in that shuttle diplomacy to try to make it work, and you know, maybe almost succeeds, but clearly doesn't.
How many of you have seen through the end of the series? Because I don't want to spoil. All right, then I won't spoil it, but I will say that from the beginning, our idea was that character is as important as the guys, and that by the end of the season, a lot of the audience is sort of riding with her. And watching that happen, watching the way in which the audience, because you can watch the audience in real time now because of Twitter, the way in which the audience did in fact find themselves not just rooting for her, empathizing with her, sympathizing with her, was incredibly rewarding, and we owe so much of that we owe to Maggie and her ability.
Can you talk a bit about the casting? I mean, at least the four central characters.
Sure. We knew Paul Giamatti. We produced The Illusionist. We think he's an incredible actor. We love him as a guy. We've wanted to work with him again since then. When we found out that he was available and would be open to doing TV, we sent him the script immediately for Chuck Rhodes. So that one was pretty easy because we think he's brilliant. Damian Lewis, we didn't know personally. We're huge fans of his work going way back. We felt that he could really put across the kind of instantaneous calculation and synthesis of all this information that these hedge fund guys seem to. And we also knew that he would have this charisma that could win people over to the role of the billionaire, which, could potentially be a more venal character. Maggie became more challenging to find. We read hundreds of women.
For Wendy, for the role of Wendy, it was almost impossible to find her. And Maggie read late one night. The casting director will upload tapes of actors reading all over the country when you're trying on a search like that, and it's theater actors from various places. And I saw that Maggie Siff had uploaded a tape, and I couldn't believe it. And the second I started watching, before she was through, she was in her living room at home. Her husband was reading with her. You could kind of hear the baby off to the side.
No makeup.
Just she was just sitting there, kind of like she'd memorized it, but she was just reading. And halfway through, I emailed Dave, like, right now, go to your computer. And he watched too, and we just knew that was it. We had the character, and it had gotten depressing. I mean, we had been in rooms with over 100 actresses auditioning and had watched 100 tapes.
And it was never right, and we actually started to think, did we write a character that's unplayable? Maybe we need to adjust this somehow. And then we saw her do it, and the whole thing was exactly as we envisioned. So we said, okay, we're fine.
And we had many incredible actresses, people whose work we love, come in, and they just didn't have this combination of things, because that character has to have this tremendous capacity for empathy and this ability to inspire. And then also you have to understand her conflict and her inner conflict and her own need for power and control. And so to have that combination of stuff and be able to do it in a way that's believable, challenging, and she really pulls it off for us. And then Malin Ackerman.
Yeah, it was a similar thing. We couldn't find the person who was right about it. A lot of the actresses would come in and they would put on like a very sort of overly conscious, I'm rich persona, Cruella de Vil kind of thing, and it was like, this isn't right. And then Malin somehow had this combination of entitlement and upper class sensibility, but yet she was totally blue collar. And later we found out that she'd grown up, like spent a year living in a car with her mom, who was a single mom, and had really felt the experience of growing up with nothing. So somehow she embodied the character.
Casting is the single most important decision you make as a showrunner. I guess after deciding, because writing the script, I guess that's a decision, the pilot. But once you're going to make the show, that determines everything that follows. And so that's the job we take. We took that job and take it each episode incredibly seriously.
My last question for now, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. Having seen the character and plot development of the first season, it strikes me that the thematic, emotional, and ethical core of the show is the contrast and methodology of Axelrod and Rhodes making choices in their respective contexts. Interestingly, Axelrod's ethics are portrayed arguably more ambiguous than Rhodes, whose prosecutorial conduct is depicted as more clearly crossing a line. Does that resonate with your own perspectives? And how?
Well, I do not want to give away the end of the series, of the season.
Well,
but I disagree.
Short of that,
I disagree with your thesis.
Okay.
I think that you bought in to what happens in the first 6 episodes, and I think that there's no doubt that Chuck Rhodes crosses the line. That's clear. But I think if you watch 10, 11, and 12, I don't think there's a way. In fact, I'll just say this. In episode 4, you see Bobby Axelrod bribe a policeman. He bribes him, right? He gives him so I think what you're falling for is his charisma, his charm, his intellect, and all the stuff that Dave was talking about. What we wanted. I'm so glad that you said that.
Some kind of confirmation bias that a guy like that would probably do something like that,
right.
But a guy in Chuck's chair shouldn't do any of these things. And you guys are uniquely in a position to know what he's doing wrong. Whereas I think uninitiated viewers who don't know the specifics of the rules think that they're both sort of in the gray.
Well, that's right, and I must say, in episode 2, it's important because it was a trick we consciously played, and I'm glad to know that it worked on you. And and in episode 2, Terry Kinney, who plays Hall, the bagman, compromises a woman who works at the U.S. Attorney's Office and gets her to turn informant. That's because Bobby Axelrod gave him a bag of cash in the first episode. He takes the bag of cash, and then he goes and extorts that woman. He bribes someone to have an affair with her with coke in the room, bribes her. That happens in the second episode of the show. So by any definition, what Bobby Axelrod does right from the beginning is worse legally, or equal, certainly as bad as what Chuck Rhodes does. The interesting question is, why didn't you see it that way?
Well, without being
why didn't you see it
without being defensive, what I was getting at is that the magic of the show is they're portrayed in such a way that is the result. I'm not saying that Bobby doesn't cross a line. There's something about, in my view, you lead the audience to seeing Rhodes as wearing a blacker hat without seeing Damian wearing a blacker hat, even though they both wear black hats.
First, I'm not crazy about the white hat, black hat thing, but also I would say that the question is why? Whose biases are creating that effect? Why is that the effect? What we were interested in exploring is why Americans as a group will say, if you ask them, oh no, we don't like rich people, we don't need them, but the biggest reality star in the world is a guy who's a friend of ours, Mark Cuban. Why is Mark Cuban a gigantic hero to so many people? Why is he the biggest reality star in the world? What are we really interested in? What does charisma buy you? That's the question we wanted to explore. So it's rewarding to us that you feel that way, but I would assert that if you actually just read it as a fact pattern, that's not the answer that you'd come to.
Well, on this note, I'll close by saying I hope that effect doesn't bias the next president. But
oh, I hadn't thought of that connection before.
So why don't we do this? At just about the right time, why don't we turn it over to you? And people who want to ask questions should go to either this microphone or that microphone. And don't be shy. They're all good questions.
All right, I guess I'm going to start it off.
Do it.
Preface this by saying I haven't seen the series, so forgive me if this is a naive question, but watching that episode, it seems very clear that there's an underlying theme of complete ambiguity as to what this guy has done, whether the hedge fund industry as a whole is inherently corrupt and is doing something that would warrant a $1.9 billion settlement by a guy who claims he's done nothing wrong. So I guess my question is, at the end of it all, given that, there's very smart people on both sides of this, I don't know what they've done, but they've come together here to the table to make a deal. What comment are you making on, let me back up one sec. In his big speech to the team, he emphasized the greatness of America and how, the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor stimulated the country to show its greatness. What comment are you making about the inherent rot there might be in our basic system, that would allow all this wealth to be generated under what seem to be fundamentally ambiguous ethics? I don't know.
I mean, you're asking us what comment we're making.
Yeah.
You just made quite a comment. I think, we're interested in those questions, and we're interested in setting up situations that evoke them. And we've written a lot of movies and things about corruption and crime in various aspects, more recognizably so, people who are career criminals and gamblers and things like that. I guess we brought that worldview to this space, and we were trying to explore, what these people are getting out of the way they're spending their lives and why they're doing it. And one of the things we came away with was, while it's, clearly some of the guys in the hedge fund business are over the line or close to the line, that's sort of clear. Some U.S. attorneys and people in prosecutorial jobs are not getting the immediate financial reward that their counterparts are getting, but they're getting a lot. And they're often going into public office and springing into the public sector, getting highly paid. So they might be doing the public good, but they're doing a lot of good for themselves too. And we're just interested in that duality.
Or as James Michener once said, they started out doing good and they did very well indeed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for both an entertaining episode and also for this rare chance to peek behind the curtain of your thinking. It's so great. And I haven't seen the series except for this episode. You know, what strikes me is that this is a dark show. It is about power and corruption and ego. And I am deeply ambivalent about that. On the one hand, it's very entertaining, and there's nothing like looking at the dark side to rev up the energy in all of us. On the other hand, I look at this show and I stack it with hundreds like it and a popular culture filled with darkness and the discourse of power and corruption. And I kind of want Walt Disney back. You know, I want the good guy.
Hold on a second.
You want the Nazi back?
I don't understand. Your shirt said you're wearing a Reacher shirt.
I know. Well,
Kills people every 5 pages in the name of his own code.
that's true. But he never goes back, and he always comes out on top. He is the ultimate hero, even though he breaks
Not
the
Do
rules.
you see a lot of real-life analogs to Jack Reacher, my friend?
Have I what?
Do you see many real-life analogs to Jack Reacher?
No, I don't. So let me just ask the question. And by the way, I'm admiring of the work, but I just want to say I'm ambivalent about it. So my question is, are you ambivalent about it? Like, what do you see? And I don't mean this as a criticism. I mean this as a thoughtful inquiry into the proper role and the limits of creating media, which, like, there's no good guy. Like, I don't see the reach for the higher good here, for the public good. It's token. And maybe I'm naive, and I can get that in Disneyland, but I'm wondering about a society that piles one on top of another on top of another in a kind of dark discourse. And I ask that with all respect and real curiosity about how you think about that.
Well, it's a really fascinating line of inquiry about the role of popular art, right? About the role of the kind of art that's on television. So Mad Men is probably my favorite television show of all time. And I think we could have a long conversation about where the hero in that show is and why. Why we identify with Don Draper. Why we end up watching Don Draper do these bad things over and over again. Even Peggy compromised herself deeply in the show. And I think you can look at John Cheever. You can look at look at The Godfather Part 2. For us, we find the exploration of these darker themes to be really compelling, fascinating, and also to leave us thinking about the world in which we live. And I don't think it would disturb you if it were a fantasy. If it were so divorced from the world in which we live that it just seemed like a thought experiment, I don't think it would rub you in that way.
I don't think people would connect to it.
And I don't
either.
think people would connect to it, exactly. And so we want to write about the world that we see, and perhaps a way we could express our higher ideals is by looking at this and then leaving you to wonder, if it has to be this way, why does it have to be this way?
That is such a good lead into my question, because I graduated from this law school 20 years ago, and as a woman in law, it's an interesting dynamic. And I'm wondering, did you ever consider casting either of those guys as women? Because I watched that and I just thought, I hate both of them. Right? Pox on both their houses, and as a woman, I thought, some of that was just male. I felt like I was watching two elks crash into each other, right? And I don't have that much time, right? So that is not a drama that I find particularly fascinating, although it plays out in law everywhere, right? And we have a professor who teaches nothing but that. And I'm just really curious because there are women in prosecutorial positions in this country, and I'm sure there's women hedge fund managers. So and I'm not criticizing
there's
you. I'm
really
just
one,
really,
actually.
really curious about it. Like, it's
Say that
not a
again, that's
criticism.
I was saying, there's one female hedge fund manager
Of
in the
that,
country.
who manages
I mean, a lot of this is about the male ego. So yeah, we didn't entertain making one of those characters a woman. One of the most I'll say probably the most boring U.S. attorney for the Southern District that we've had is Mary Jo White. And I say that in the most complimentary way. She is referred to by all of her colleagues, all the people that preceded her and succeeded her, as beyond reproach and the most moral and the most ethical. And that's really boring for dramatic purposes. So what would happen in these scenes? She would always be right, and the other guy would be horrible, and I don't know where it would go.
But if you only saw this episode, Wendy Rhodes is that character becomes incredibly central to the show. So
No, it wasn't a criticism. I was just curious, because
No, it's a criticism.
in framing like prosecutorial discretion.
yeah, let's all own our words. And it's fair. It's fine. You're allowed not to like the show.
No, I liked it. I was just really curious as to the way you framed it, and I just wondered if there was some thought that went into it, or just automatically kind
What's
of.
been rewarding for us is that critics like Emily Nussbaum have said it's their favorite shows of the season, and women who seem to recognize these characters. So I agree with you.
recognize the characters.
I'm right, and that's what
The
we're
female
interested in.
characters, though, like
Yeah, but
as you watch the season, you'll see that there's a bunch of strong.
Well,
She might. I think she might.
I don't get Showtime.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, do I have to use the mic or?
Do whatever you want, man.
Okay. So I have a question because not really a question, more of just like a thing. We're living in a sort of not a new age of medium. A lot of people are calling it like the golden age of television. We have a lot of shows like Mad Men, House of Cards. There's a lot of shows with like morally ambiguous characters. So I was wondering from your show having two pretty morally ambiguous characters, like I mean Brian, or can I call you Brian?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
You obviously favor the law, like you say that Chuck Rhodes crosses the law, and what's his name, the bad guy, the Axelrod, or I guess they're both bad, the hedge fund. He bribes a policeman, and you say that's like that sets him worse than anything like you can do, right? So for you, in those two people, which one do you see as more?
Oh yeah, I don't think it. I'm glad you went back to that. So I don't see. I understand both of these characters, and I want to frame it that we start from a place of curiosity. So we started from a place of trying to understand why somebody wants to be in either of those positions, what they get out of it, what their why is, how they see themselves versus the way that they act in the world and how we might see them. What I would say is that each of those men believes they're acting with a higher purpose of some sort. And they're each absolutely beyond morally ambiguous. They're really questionable. Their action, and so that's clear. None of what you saw was by accident. What I was trying to say is that one of the tricks of the show is that people find themselves rooting for Bobby Axelrod, and we're interested in why that is. There's no doubt that Chuck Rhodes absolutely commits prosecutorial misconduct, not to spoil the panel after, but I mean tons of prosecutorial misconduct in a really bad way.
Yeah, but do you believe in like the greater good, like he's breaking we have a lot of TV shows.
Well, we think that as a character, he believes that he's seeking the greater good, so these momentary infractions serve it in service of trying to land this guy are justified. And we think that's a very human thing. Whether or not anybody here has had experience with people in those jobs or has held those jobs and ever has sunk to that behavior, that's another thing. It's dramatic character.
Can I, on your point, and further to both you guys, I made note of something. Billions opened on British television on Thursday, and no doubt you read the Guardian piece on it, because if you didn't, this is on point. I'll just read it. It's not long. The Guardian wrote an opening feature which was separate from its review, sort of an analysis of the show. And they said the following. Axelrod's honor is open to question in Billions. It's typical of the new breed of premium cable shows in that it centers on an anti-hero, a Tony Soprano or a Walter White, who you can't help but root for. There are no moral black and whites here. Damian Lewis points out that megalomania and megabucks do strange things to morality. This is what he says, a direct quote from Damian Lewis. Bobby might have convinced himself of the truth of everything he does, perhaps in the same way Tony Blair convinced himself of the truth. He noted it's difficult to say that Blair was consciously mendacious. I just think he drank some Kool-Aid and managed to create a moral and intellectual argument to justify everything he did. That's what powerful people do. It's what delusional people do.
That's great.
That's Damian's
Excellent.
take.
Awesome. Excellent.
And if you extrapolate that, you're hearing an actor sort of speaking about his process of understanding how to get inside that character. So,
yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment.
Okay, I guess you're next. All right, you're next.
I have two questions. The first one is, if you think Maggie Siff's success in reading for the character of Wendy is directly related to her experience from Sons of Anarchy, where her character is also in a moral sandwich of doing good as a doctor versus being the wife of sociopath?
Sure.
Okay. That's question one. Or if it's something else. Question two is there a straight line from Rounders, which is about the underground gambling scene in New York, to Billions, which is about the above ground, mostly?
It's a great, that's awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm sure that there is.
I think it's a crooked line, not a straight line, but there's a line.
Nice.
We were not, Kurt Sutter's a great writer. Sons of Anarchy is not a show we spent a lot of time watching.
I never saw it, but
Maggie's
it might be there for her. You might be right.
Maggie said
we didn't see it that way, like, oh, she did that, so she can do this. We just saw what she did with our character.
How much of the show have you seen?
Which one?
The Billions.
Just this.
Okay, so Maggie's character has, and she would say this and has said it, this character has a tremendous amount of personal agency, particularly in the second half of the season, and the character on Sons of Anarchy had much less personal agency. So I don't think she doesn't see a strong connection between them, and we never watched that show. Maggie, the thing about Maggie's a brilliant woman. She went to Bronx Science. She's like full scholarship to college. She's and right out of college and NYU, right out of college, she began having tremendous success in the theater. She's just a brilliant actress. That's these four people. And even as you go down the call sheet, these actors are all incredible, really theater-trained actors. And so I think it's her entire lifetime of experience what makes her somebody great to play this part. And yes, to the second question.
Okay, quick question. This is the only episode I've seen. When is it coming out on DVD? Or is it already out?
I'm not sure about the DVD, but it's downloadable.
Oh, it's downloadable. Okay.
Yeah, if you don't have Showtime, you don't have Showtime. You can get an app.
Showtime now.
Oh, you can actually get Showtime anytime for free for 30 days and watch the whole thing and then just cancel the subscription. Can you guys cut that part out of the video of this so that I don't get in trouble on my betters?
That wasn't my question. My real question is, I'm very impressed with how mindful you are in terms of themes and exploring intellectual and behavioral issues with your characters. There's a concept that life imitates art. So in your writing, do you ever intentionally open up your dynamics of your episodes? Thank you. Struggling. Such that you might open doors for new behaviors by hedge fund managers. In other words, your power as artists to shape.
Well, I know the question you're asking, and it's a little bit similar to what he's saying. And there's two schools of thought. One that art sets the times, and one that art reflects the times. I believe that art reflects the times, and I don't believe it's art's responsibility to sort of force feed some kind of moral construct, because I don't believe it'll be bad art and a bad delivery system for whatever that message is. The piece of art can only exist in its time. It can only be created in its time and hopefully last through till other times if there's something universal about it. So I don't think that any hedge fund manager is going to see this and be like, hey, that's a great idea. I should figure out how to be an insider trader because Bobby Axelrod is cool. I mean, there's a subset of hedge fund guys that are willing to cross the line in order to make their returns. And most of them won't. That's just the way it is with people.
I enjoyed how there were a couple different ways to view Giamatti's character. So you mentioned earlier that he seems like a guy who thinks the means justify the end, but the end is good in his mind. But I think you can also see him either as essentially a power-hungry psychopath who's doing as much as he must in response to the tensions from his wife and the AG, or you could see him as somebody who's struggling with between the dark and the light, who he tries to do the right thing and settle the case, and then he just can't get there, and he has to piss in Axelrod's face, so to speak, at the end and blow up the deal. And did you set out trying to set up those multiple views in the episode, or is it something that sort of came out in the writing as it came along?
Yeah, I mean,
You nailed it. I mean, that's absolutely, everything you just said is right.
Yep. And I'll say that there's one other element maybe, that has to do with his age and where he is on his career continuum. I think that you can set out with certain goals and certain sureties in your life, and you go through times where you lose them. And then it's a question of, are you going to stay at the place, in the lost place, or refine what you had set out to find?
I just want to go back to one thing, which is what you said about reflects it, the times, or suggests, predicts. I was thinking about the 60s, and I think it's really valid if you feel the times are super dark not to want to engage with that kind of material. There's a reason Motown was so enormously successful in the late 60s, but Bob Dylan was also. And I think that you can look at various times. I mean, there are times, like right now in the world, I just want to watch Aaron Sorkin's The American President over and over again. Because what a great world it would be if that were our president and the biggest issue, coming up. I mean, I'm a big supporter of President Obama's, but when I think about the future, it'd be great to just shut that stuff off. But then part of me feels like what I have to do is watch Parallax View over and over again, and All the President's Men, and all the great conspiracy and Network, especially now if you think about the way the television business is. So I think that it's totally valid to take either point at any time. In the 80s during Reagan, there were people who wanted to, and just after that, there were people who wanted to listen to Will Smith. There were people who wanted to listen to Public Enemy. I wanted to listen to Public Enemy.
So in trying to view Billions kind of in the big picture of American pop culture and the law, there isn't a huge amount about prosecutors, but what there is extraordinarily favorable. Law and Order ran 20 years. It's the longest running show in television history. And every single one of those episodes, the last 15 of the 20 years, with Jack McCoy, played by Sam Waterston as the chief prosecutor in New York, and you always trusted that guy to exercise his discretion wisely. He was so always looking for justice and never overreaching. Maybe a little bit, but really you could trust him. And this is so dramatically different as a picture of the prosecutorial function. Any comments on how you're seeing prosecutors so differently than Law and Order did?
Well, if you take these professions as a representation of all people, then most people that go into those jobs are going to be moral and stick to the code of what they're doing to the best of their ability. That's why they're there. It wasn't an accident. But we just became aware that there was this sort of series of people that we were witnessing just by living in New York and reading the papers. Going back to Giuliani, who, not to say that he did any of these things, but he's well known for overreach in certain ways and being willing to really steamroll innocent people in order to flip them up to get the guilty people through Spitzer, through whatever's going to happen with Cuomo now. You know, there's just this subset within the profession that seems like it's willing to misbehave in order to carry out their own sort of program or to benefit themselves. So there are, like you said, there's a lot of shows with noble prosecutors and honest judges and all that stuff. We wanted to do the other thing. We like lifting the rock and seeing what's crawling around under there.
We were talking at dinner last night about a judge who's an honorable judge, who's one of the most highly regarded judges, and I'm not going to say his name, and I'm going to veil the fact pattern.
I won't know it.
But I'm going to veil the fact pattern. But a judge who had a case reversed and then ended up getting to sit in another circuit and rule the other way, and now the case
on a case with the same fact
similar fact pattern case, and it sounds.
You said it.
You said Rakoff.
We didn't say Rakoff.
Well, so tell what happened. Say the fact pattern. Explain what happened.
How did?
So this is a case that's going up to the United States Supreme Court. Oral argument is going to be, or hasn't been set.
Use the mic while we're recording.
Oh, okay. Get you guys off the hook.
And we weren't at dinner together. I mean, you happened to just say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just happened, right. I'm a plant. I'm a shill. I'm
Right.
in the audience.
Yeah.
I have no idea who they are. I have no idea who I am. Jed Rakoff, judge, United States District Court, absolutely fantastic, terrific guy. There's a decision out of the Second Circuit in a case called Newman, highly controversial, insider trading. There's a line of insider trading law that says no liability if the tipper gets no personal benefit from the tip. All right, now, great metaphysical issue. Personal benefit. Suppose you give somebody a gift, all right? Well, sometimes you give somebody a gift and there's an expectation you're going to get something in return. Well, if there's an expectation you're going to get something in return, how tangible does that expectation have to be? Do you have to be expecting money? Do you have to be expecting something concrete? Or is brotherly love sufficient? Or is the fact like you seem like a nice guy? We were college friends.
Yes.
So where's the line?
So Rakoff rules.
So wait, Rakoff was not in that case.
Right.
Okay? So that was a case, Second Circuit, Rakoff was not involved, but it sets the law by which Rakoff has to judge these cases. Now, luck, he winds up sitting by designation in the Ninth Circuit out here in California, and an insider trading case comes up.
No, he was the judge in Newman.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, excuse me.
That's
he
the
ruled,
whole
right,
point.
right.
He
Yeah,
was
excuse
the
me.
judge in the Newman
My
case.
bad. He was the judge at the district court level in Newman. He then gets reversed.
Got overturned.
All right, gets overturned by the Second Circuit. He then comes out in the Ninth Circuit.
Just miraculously, first time in his career,
I mean,
he decides, hey, I'm
this
going to go
could
sit on
not
the
have
Ninth
been.
Circuit. What
How
the
was
heck?
this fixed? All right, how did they do
But
it?
How
sitting
was
on
it?
the
We
exact
don't-
same
I don't
case.
know.
So what happened? So then he gets on the
Ninth
Ninth.
Circuit, he winds up on the three-judge panel, has essentially the same issue, and winds up deciding
Writes the opinion.
exactly opposite, all right, of what the Second Circuit decides, and he rules that a gift is a gift, and we don't care whether there's any tangible purpose or pecuniary benefit from that gift.
Right. Now, we believe Judge Rakoff's an honorable man. We
I'll let him know.
met with him. We met with him. We believe he's an honorable man. But he tells us the story and says it's, and it probably is coincidence that he's an incredibly, in New York, like the most highly regarded judge on this issue. He gets reversed, ends up on the Ninth Circuit, and gets to write the contrary opinion that's now going to go to the Supreme Court. And so you look at that fact pattern. If you're people who create drama for a living, and you say, well, all right, it's fair to say that's a coincidence, but it's also fair for us to examine how exactly that happens and what might one's motivation be to be the person writing that opinion that's challenging the reversal. And so that is what we're interested in getting into, because that's the world we see. And perhaps it's our own cynicism that finds it hard to accept that level of
If
coincidence.
that's coincidence, I want to go lottery ticket shopping with them.
Did you have a second question, it seemed like? No, not him. Go ahead. No, he can ask. If he has another question, he can ask it. Yeah, go ahead. You go first.
So I actually have seen the whole series, and I think it's great. Although I wasn't sure until about the third or fourth that I was going to stick with it. But
Well, thanks for staying in that long to get there.
So I just want to know what you can tell us about season 2. How much of it is written? Where does the plot go?
We're going to tell you very little because that's just the way we feel about it. We want it to be a surprise to people. But I guess we could say that some of the issues that have been raised in this room are not going to be left in the rearview mirror. These are the things that the show is about, and there are certain consequences and certain reflections and things. There's a tail to some of these actions that will play out in the second
Yeah, I
season.
mean, all we'd hoped for was people to respond in these ways, and anger at these characters is fine for us. The fact, engagement is what we want. We want people to wrestle with these questions in the same way that we're wrestling with them.
Do you consider Paul Giamatti's character as a tragic hero?
I think there's no question there are classically tragic elements because both of these characters have the capacity to be far greater than they are. But I don't know about hero. The word hero, I don't think either of us would use the word hero.
Do you consider him tragic?
We think you can make the argument that there are elements of.
Does he have potential, and does he lose it throughout the series?
I don't know.
You got to recognize that, let's say that this thing goes 5 seasons. Who knows, right? If it's going to keep getting reordered, if it stays alive for us, if it's the thing. So if that's the case, though, we're in the first act of something. So, it's hard to speak with finality about who he is and where he's going to end up. Yeah, keep watching.
First of all, this is my first time seeing the show. This episode, great writing. I mean, really tight. Great dialogue.
Wes Jones, one of our writers, wrote a lot of the dialogue in this episode. So shout out to Wes Jones. Yeah,
really good. Question though is it seems the genre seems like The Good Wife. The people who did The Good Wife also spoke.
They're terrific. They're Robert's a friend of mine. They're terrific.
The genre is kind of dark, somber, and is it just your feeling in terms of where society is, or do you actually have focus? Not going to say focus groups, but do you go around and is it more just your personal opinion about what you believe, and therefore you say, we have a show, and therefore we can sell it to a studio, and this is what we think, or is there and that's your view currently, or is it more a broad? How do you get your broad?
There's no focus group involved in the creation of the show. We, in fact, we wrote the pilot on spec, which means we didn't pitch it to the network beforehand. We wrote it the way we saw fit, and then they bought it. After the pilot was made, they show it to a test audience just for their own internal data. It has no effect on the series. We steer that the way we see fit, and I wouldn't say that we've created the tone out of any kind of calculation. It's much more the way we see it, and you did only see a slice of the tone. I mean, it's a moment where things are very heightened. A lot of storylines come to a head in this episode. There are other times where there's a lot of humor in the show, actually. If you watched along the way, it's not all locked in the depths of this struggle. It also unpacks their lives separate of each other and what's going on with them and who they are. And like I said, it's quite funny at times.
This will be the last question.
Hi, thank you for the show. I've seen the whole series. My husband and I have enjoyed it tremendously. And I just wanted to give you some kudos for strong women characters, especially, as you said, the Wendy Rhodes character, and to say that the conflict between, the struggle between two hardworking parents on the home scene, unavoidable conflicts between who gets this time or whose career gets priority. And I would hate to see the show lose that, or particularly to lose that strong female character. I do family law. We have a tremendous number of crazy and interesting stories, especially if any of these such relationships might ever break up. Anyway, maybe you could throw in an older family law attorney who would be
awesome.
For next, you need more stories on that side. Oh, we're full of them. Anyway, have fun next season. I can't wait to see it roll out.
What a perfect last question. Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you all. Thank you. Great job, David. Thank you. Well done. That's what I wanted to.